Hey everybody, my name is Ryan Sheeran, back with another episode of Business Uncensored. Now, I am very honored to have our next guest with us. Journalism is one of those things that I like. I read the news. I think everybody reads the news. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a reporter. I always respected. I'm going to age myself here. The Dan Rethers, the Peter Jennings, all those people that we grew up watching that delivered us our big important stories. So journalism has always had a great place where I'm at. So when I had the opportunity to interview this next guest, I absolutely jumped on it. Not only were they on air with CBS, Peabody Award winning, 12 Emmys, traveled the globe, did about everything that I ever dreamed of doing. But it's not about me. It's about them. And everybody, welcome to the show, Mark Albert. Mark Albert, welcome to our humble little podcast here.
Ryan, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Oh, 1,000%. I want to get into this because you've kind of transitioned out of journalism into your own company to help other companies deal with media. And we're going to get to that. But I want to start by what got you into journalism and what gave you the bug to spend and commit your entire life to this journey that you went on.
Well, I'll tell you what, I have insatiable curiosity. And I can remember when I was 11 years old, I used my allowance to buy the Sunday subscription to the LA Times. We lived in Southern California. And then when I was 11, I started watching the local news. And I remember this feeling where I just wanted to know what was happening first. And I wanted to tell other people about it. I remember in the 1992 presidential elections, I was sitting there watching at night and counting, like people sometimes count baseball scores, right, manually. I was counting electoral college votes. And I would run and tell my mom in the kitchen, oh my gosh, George H.W. Bush, he's up by 5 electoral votes because, Georgia just came in or something. And then I'd run and tell my dad, oh, Bill Clinton now, he's up, whatever, Ross Perot, right? And I loved learning about things first and telling people about them. And then in high school, I helped create a TV production club, and we would do newscasts. And so I just was always fascinated with getting the news and getting it first. And then I went to University of Southern California, USC, go Trojans, played in the marching band there, alto saxophone. And I always knew I wanted to be a journalist when I went there. I never changed my major. And I just love learning about things. I have a lot of curiosity. I think that's why I travel so much around the globe. And I've been fascinated with news and developments and politics and business and technology and how that all evolves. To this day, Ryan, and I know I'm going to sort of probably date myself here, to this day, I get 3 newspapers delivered on my doorstep, an actual newspaper, and I get 3 more in my email. And so I consume news all day long. It is just fascinating to me. And I think that the best type of society is an informed one. And so I would just say to all of your viewers, listeners, and readers, support your local news media, consume local news. You'll be better informed for it.
Was there any specialty that you went into in journalism? Because you mentioned you mentioned a lot of things like business and politics and tech or anything. Was there anything that in your career that you just really specialized down into?
So I specialized actually in investigative reporting. So probably 18 to 20 of my 25 years, I was doing investigative reporting. That's how I won my Peabody, the majority of the Emmys. I created and led the first ever national investigative unit for Hearst Communications. And they have, for example, they have, TV stations in Kansas City, Missouri, and Sacramento, and Orlando, and Boston. And they have newspapers, the San Francisco Chronicle, Houston Chronicle. So I was leading this team of national investigators, and our stories would air on all those platforms. So really my bread and butter is investigative journalism, trying to hold people to account, find the truth, get to the bottom of what's happening, and always chase the facts wherever they may lead.
Is there a story that you did in your investigative journalism career that still haunts you or lives with you today?
Yes, it's actually the 5-part series that we did on the death of a Minnesota sailor. And he was killed in Iraq, serving in Iraq with some Marines. And they were at a base in Iskandariyah, Iraq, and he was found dead in the showers on September 11th, 2004. Now, it's about 20 years coming up here. We're taping this podcast in August of 2024. In the next month, it'll be the 20th anniversary of his death. And the military told his family that he died of an undiagnosed heart ailment. Now, 4 years later, the Pentagon reopened some death investigations, and David Cedergren was one of them. And I remember interviewing David's family in Minnesota, and I couldn't believe, Ryan, that 4 years after their loved one's death, they still didn't have the full answer as to how he died. They doubted that it was this undiagnosed heart ailment. So we used the Freedom of Information Act, which is a public records act that allows anybody to get documents from the government. We asked for the investigative file from NCIS and from the Pentagon. And you know what? After 6 months, they denied it. So guess what? We appealed, right? And we finally won and got that file. And you know what it showed? It showed that the base where he served in Iraq had such bad electrical problems that when it rained, sparks would jump from the ground, that other Marines had been burned and injured at that base and in those very showers where Dave Cedergren's body was found. And in fact, the base commanders admitted the way they chose local Iraqi electricians to work on these well-known problems on base were the oldest ones. And why? They wrote down that, well, they went with the oldest local Iraqi electricians because they figured if they lived that long, they must know what they were doing.
That's not a great marker of expertise.
No. And so you know what we uncovered? Because we got the autopsy photos and we got power of attorney from the family. And we found that he was actually electrocuted in those showers, that there was a clear pattern of other people getting shocked and burned and injured. And the base commanders did not fix the problem. We got answers for this family. And as a result of our series, NCIS apologized to that family, and the Armed Forces Medical Examiner changed the way the U.S. tracks the remains of all American service members killed around the globe. That's accountability journalism. That's what happens when you chase the truth. And I'm so grateful that we got answers for this family, and I still keep in touch with them for this day.
Well, that's isn't that what it's all about? Because you mentioned accountability journalism is when you go into investigative journalism and you track down these things. That's what you're after, really, is to find out the true story. And that leads me to my next question. Is there ever a time that you're like, hey, there's a story here, and you start tracking it, and then there's really no story there?
Oh, it happens all the time. I would say probably 75% of the stories that journalists start going down end up fizzling out for one reason or another. They just aren't they don't happen. Now journalists get story ideas, whether it's news of the day, whether it's tips from sources, whether it's sources they developed on their own, or whether it's their own curiosity that makes them start asking questions, like with me and the death of David Cedergren. And so I would say that probably 75% of the story ideas don't turn. They just don't end up coming to fruition. So that happens a lot. But you know what? If you're batting 250, you're still a pretty good Major League Baseball player.
I love baseball scores or baseball statistics, because you're right. At 250, you're still doing great. And if you apply that everywhere, you do pretty well. So when we watch, because I think a lot of people get their ideas of investigative journalism and stuff off TV, of course, TV and movies and things. Has there ever been a time that it's grown really dangerous? Because that's like every suspense thriller, right? Is that an investigative journalist starts this and all this? Is that just a movie trope, or is there any time that you actually felt scared by investigating certain stories?
So I have showed up at places and I've had somebody come at me with a shotgun and order me to leave. And I was on public property. I was in a street. And I've had people threaten my family. I've had them threaten my parents. I've had them threaten all kinds of things. And it's honestly gotten really, really worse in the last 8 years or so. But it's not for the faint of heart. And of course, there have been, I think so far this year, 60 or 70 journalists killed around the globe just for doing their jobs. There have been journalists that have been in prison. We just saw a couple of days before we're taping this podcast, Evan Gershkovich from the Wall Street Journal and some others released from Russian custody. Evan was reporting for the Wall Street Journal in Russia. He wasn't doing any espionage. Journalism is not a crime. And so we see journalists consistently in harm's way, whether you look at the journalists killed in covering the Israel-Palestine conflict that's going on, whether you see journalists killed in Ukraine and injured. Journalists put themselves in harm's way every day for one reason: to get the truth. This is not fake news. This is not the enemy of the people. You cannot have a free society and a democracy without journalism, free, independent media. And so we should all be very grateful that every day journalists are willing to go to such lengths to get us the truth so that we can be informed.
And to finish up the investigative journalism thing, one story sticks out in my mind. I remember I used to live down in Laredo, Texas, later Brownsville area, and people would literally go report on the cartel and turn up dead 2 days later. Like it was just that general churn, and there were some horrific stories about that. Was there ever something that come across your desk that was just too dangerous, and you're like, I'm not even touching that. That's not a thing I'm gonna take my next steps on.
Well, first of all, just to acknowledge our colleagues in Mexico, there have been dozens of journalists killed simply for trying to report the truth, as you point out. And
Hmm.
so, hats off to their sacrifice, and I'm very grateful for them. But in my case, no, there hasn't been a story where I felt so scared that I was going to not cover it. Now, that being said, I've embedded with the U.S. military a couple of times, twice in Iraq, covering the Iraq War, and you're strapped into an MRAP, which is a very up armored vehicle, right? And you're trained about how to do a tourniquet on yourself if you hit an IED and all these things. But you just have to push that out of your mind, right? And you have to focus on getting the story, being as safe as you can, but you can't let fear overwhelm you and paralyze you. And so we were very grateful to be with amazing U.S. service members who protected us. But so there have been obviously dangerous assignments, but nothing that I can recall where I said, you know what, this is so dangerous, I'm not going to do it. Now, my family wishes that I had not gone to Iraq, but
Right, right, yeah.
no stories that I can recall that I said, you know what, I'm not doing this solely because of the safety factor.
And I didn't mean that in any disparaging way, because looking at your history, that you've done quite a bit. I was just wondering if there was a line that you were like, that as far as I'll go, this wasn't it.
No, in 25 years, I don't think I ever came to that point. A lot of people threaten you after the story airs,
Hmm.
and at which point it's kind of like, well, too late now. Right? I don't
Right.
regret doing the story, but it's people are angry because you've exposed something that they wanted to keep in the shadows. And so a lot of the threats or the death threats or whatever it happens to be, honestly, a lot of them come afterwards. There were a couple of times where I felt targeted before the story aired. I had a major corporation try to snoop into my personal life and go to my boss and all that stuff. And, it almost never works. So I thought it was just unprofessional. But no, in answer to your question, I haven't pulled away from a story because of that.
In overall news, as we've been talking, that you caught the bug in '92 of doing this to now, you're really involved in news reporting in the industry. On the outside looking in, not being involved, you see a pretty good divide in media. As far as people on the outside are talking about media bias or these things, have you seen that to be true in news, that you need to be careful where you get your news from? Or how do you navigate that being part of journalism, I guess is my question.
Well, I'm really glad you asked. And I actually want to hit on two words that you used. You used the word media and you used the word news. And I would just stress to your audience, those things are not interchangeable. They're not synonymous. The media is so diverse these days with so many platforms. The Kardashians are part of the media. A podcast is part of the media. The Wall Street Journal is part of the media, right? Everybody carries a media studio in their pocket if you have a cell phone, a smartphone. And so the media is a very, very broad term. News media is simply a segment of the overall media. So often when people say fake news or they're criticizing the media bias, they don't actually refer or they don't actually mean a specific journalism outlet. They're painting everyone with the same brush. And so just because one reads information, whether it be in a media platform or a news platform, that one doesn't like, that doesn't mean that publication, that newsroom is biased. The famous phrase is facts don't care about your feelings. They really
Correct.
don't. And so just because you don't like an article, just because you don't like the facts, it doesn't really matter. You can certainly in this day and age go and find a plethora of media sources that will simply pump out exactly what you want to hear. But that's not what we want to be an informed society, is it? We want to have a diverse set of viewpoints and we want to make sure we're well informed. I don't know about you, Ryan, but my mom never told me that I could always have ice cream for dinner. I had to have some protein and some vegetables before dessert. You can't just eat ice cream in your media diet. It's cheap, it's fattening, and it's high of calories and falsehoods. And so I would just say that a lot of people who say, oh, that's the biased media. Well, what specifically are you talking about? Are you talking about USA Today? Are you talking about CBS News? Are you talking about the opinion shows on cable news networks that start at 5 or 6 p.m. at night? People also have lower media literacy than I've ever realized before. People think the editorial page in a newspaper is the same as the front page. No, there's a wall of church and state. The two don't coordinate. They don't even interact. In a cable news program, what airs at 10 a.m. is not what airs at 8 p.m. Those are different day blocks and day parts with different mandates. And so I fear that our eroding sense of media literacy in this country has allowed people to sort of get rid of the goodwill that used to exist. They are not understanding the role of the news media. They think that their news diet should simply consist with things that they agree with. That's not doing anybody any good. That's when millions of people get duped by disinformation and misinformation, falsehoods, and they unknowingly or knowingly spread that in their Facebook feed, their TikTok feed, and all these other places. So if you want to fight back against any sort of biased information you find, the best thing you can do is make sure you're getting factual information from non-biased independent media sources that don't automatically conflate with your world view. I can't stress that enough.
I'm so glad that you said all of that, because I live my life like I have like 7 different news sources on my phone now, because I see people all the time getting caught up in that echo chamber of the algorithms of I believe this and I'm only going to read the things that agree with my philosophies, my party, my business, my whatever. And so you have to go, you really have to go through different channels to make sure that these things line up. You have to investigate what your source is, at least to a certain extent, to understand that you are getting factual news and factual media. And it's becoming harder and harder to do for the layperson every day.
Ryan, I'm going to give your listeners, viewers, and readers a very simple tip. If you find yourself always agreeing with the source where you're getting your information, and if you always find that when you read information from that source, that it evokes an emotion of rage or anger or disgust or irritation, that's a good sign you're being duped. That's a good sign that you're being manipulated for somebody's profit center or clicks or clickbait or whatever it happens to be. Legitimate news sources don't seek to evoke anger and frustration and irritation and rage out of you. They simply present the facts with crucial context and guidance so that you can make informed decisions. So if you're scrolling through your social media feed and you find that you get angry and upset and depressed and despondent, and you have these negative feelings when you are reading information, I would just submit that you're not getting your sources of information from legitimate news outlets. Instead, you're being manipulated for profit and gain.
I always look in first paragraph if they use word like disgraced. That's a big one, and there's just a handful of words that if it's anywhere in the first paragraph, I know there's a bias to that article. I do a lot of, I use Grounded News. I actually like Reddit newsfeed to a certain extent because it kind of compiles a bunch for you. But yeah, you click a button and you can always tell by the first paragraph, by the descriptive words they use about the focus of the news article, if this is biased or not. And it's just something that I've trained myself to do. And I really wish other people would do more, because you're right. As you scroll on Facebook or TikTok or whatever your preferred social media is, you're right that people get enraged and they get mad, or they just watch one news source, whichever news source that may be. And that is clearly biased. And it's kind of like if you spend a lot of time with your best friend, you start picking up their traits and qualities. So if you spend your entire time getting your information source by one source, you're going to pick up those proclivities to examine information the way that they do.
Junk in, junk out.
Absolutely. So let's transition a little bit here into media advisory experts, because one of my old show, I always start with the question, why should we trust you? Now I just give the first 10 minutes of the show to why should we trust you? Because by now people understand that you're the real deal. I think in all business, it's become like resume, especially in the podcast era that you can say, I'm this, I'm that, and you can inflate things. But just over this course of the conversation, I think if anybody out there doubts your qualifications for what you do in your business, they just need to not do that. But tell me a little bit about media advisory experts and how that came to be in your transition out of journalism to there.
Sure. So, after 25 years on air in journalism, including at CBS News, as you mentioned, and Hearst, I had enough gray hair and I thought, quarter century is a nice round number. So let's do something, adjacent to journalism, something a little bit different, but where I have a wealth of experience and knowledge. Because you know what? For 25 years, people have tried to pitch me stories. And so now I can help people, make sure that they amplify their message and they get media coverage because I know how it works on the inside. And so I started teaching and advising in 2016. The State Department hired me to go to Pakistan and teach journalism to journalists there. Almost every year since 2017, I've gone to Vietnam and taught in newsrooms there. And I was an adjunct at Northwestern University here in the US. And so now I help executives, entrepreneurs, companies, organizations, public speakers, thought leaders try to hone their message. What is their core message? How can you craft that to get a journalist's attention? And how can you amplify your message in the news media? And so that's what we do. We do media training, so getting you ready to be on camera or interviewed, print or video or whatever it happens to be. We do crisis communications guidance and advice. And then we also help you make sure you can amplify your message in the media. We do some live trainings. We've got one coming up in a couple of weeks. And this is a way that I feel like I can use my experience of 25 years to bring together people who have a lot of expertise and the journalists who need experts. So let's bring them together. Let's make sure that the journalists looking for experts can find those experts that have something to say.
And how have you watched your company grow over, you said it's been a little over a year that or how long has this company been in existence, I guess should be my question.
Sure. So the company actually started back, 7 or 8 years ago. However, when I stepped away from journalism, then I went into it full time, and we've got a small team here. And so really, I would say a year since we've been doing this full time, and the momentum has been incredible. I just was training about 300 election administrators on how to clearly communicate their message in an environment of disinformation and misinformation and threats. I spoke at a national campus safety conference a couple of weeks ago about how when there is a crisis on campus, whether it's a shooting, whether it's a hazmat spill, whether it's protests about something in the news, how those campuses can clearly communicate with the media and by extension, the public. And then we're doing one-on-one media training. So I've done media training for the number 2 at a $6 billion company. You probably have their products in your house right now. And we've done it so individually and group, trying to get people ready for their moment and make sure that they have crafted a message that will be compelling and get them the coverage that they deserve.
What is one of the biggest mistakes? Because you teach people how to do this. What is one of the biggest mistakes that you see in crisis that these companies do? Because we've all seen people come on TV and you're like, you should not have said that. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen?
Well, some of the biggest mistakes, and I mean, there have been a plethora of those this year alone with some very big companies in the US, is that one, the company immediately adopts a bunker mentality. So they don't communicate often on social media and on other public platforms. They don't go out on video, on camera, and whether that is something that they record in-house and then post and release to the media, or whether that's a news conference, or whether it's doing a one-on-one on CNBC or ABC News or something like that. They don't communicate authentically, rapidly, and transparently. That is one of the major mistakes that they make. Another one is that everything that they release is too lawyerly. It doesn't sound like a real person wrote it. It's trying to CYA, right? Mm-hmm. And so people really want authentic communication and to say what happened, that you're taking responsibility, that you apologize for the inconvenience, and here's what you're doing, not just to fix it now, but to make sure it doesn't happen again. And so I think that a lot of that, I don't know why companies continue to make the same mistakes when there is a wide array of case studies. And so we try to help prevent that in the beginning. Ryan, I have to say, you don't wait to change the oil in your car until after the engine seizes, right? You do preventative maintenance.
Right.
So I don't know why more companies and organizations don't do preventative crisis communications planning. And so we try to encourage them, hey, contact us, contact someone else, but be prepared so you're not trying to build an airplane as you're trying to fly it for the very first time.
And I get you get that quite a bit. That sounds like an experience thing that you're speaking of.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. People call us when they're in need. And of course, we'll take that phone call, but it would have been far better had we been able to draft a crisis communications plan in advance.
So tell me a little more about since this is more business, your media training for executives. Other than crisis, where do executives fall in the media? You tend to, we tend to focus on thinking we see them then, but what are some other areas executives find their way in?
Sure. So let's say that the news media, you've got a reporter, you've got a journalist that wants to do a story about whatever you've pitched. Great, fantastic. You've put the bait on the hook. They've grabbed it. Fantastic. But where a lot of executives fall short is when they get to that interview and it's all over the place. They haven't come up with a concise message. They haven't come up with their concise elevator pitch. They don't know how to pivot in the interview. They don't know how to reframe their core message in subsequent answers. They don't know how to handle the occasional hostile question or uncomfortable question. And they sort of are just all over the place. And that is not a good use of that media opportunity. And so when executives bring us in, we're not just working on how you craft a message. We're working on how can you effectively communicate that message in interviews, and make sure that in a 10 or 15-minute interview, when you may only get a minute or a minute and a half on the evening news, that you can be reasonably assured that your core message will somehow work into that coverage. The other problem, Ryan, that I see is that, just like I was mentioning that the general public has a lower amount of media literacy than I've seen in the past, a lot of these executives are so busy dealing with investors and product and customers and employees that they don't really understand how the media works. And so we do Media 101. We talk about what a story pitch is. We talk about how journalism in the US works. We talk about what is okay and what is not okay to do if you're being interviewed. And then crucially, we bring in a camera crew and we take everything we've taught them and we put it on camera. And then we review with them how they did. So we stop and start. Here's what you did great. And here's what we need to work on. And seeing themselves on camera with someone who's spent 25 years on air is extremely helpful. And you should see the huge curve, the learning curve, and how much better they get right away.
So one of the things I'm going to commiserate with you, because I do a lot of marketing videos, marketing podcasts, stuff like that. There's nothing like watching that person go through, understand seeing themselves on camera in a way, and how badly that just throws a loop in their psyche. I'm on camera a lot. I do this a lot. You're on camera a lot. You do this a lot. I'm not trying to say I'm at your level or whatever, but I'll bring a new client in. I'm like, no, we're going to do some podcasts. We're going to do some video work. We're going to do whatever. And as soon as they get on video, it's like their mind just falls out of their back of their head, and it's hard, and they're overly critical, and they can't stop looking at their hair, or they can't stop looking at this, or I said too much, or I did this or that. How do you get people past that? Because I've got ways that I do it, but how do you in media training get people past that fear of being on video?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think there are a lot of people that have that fear. In fact, I just saw a study the other day that it was 72% of the public are afraid of public speaking, right? And so that's a real thing. And that's something that we have to work on so that these executives feel comfortable going in front of the media, just like they're comfortable on an investor call, just like they're comfortable doing a funding round or dealing with customers and employees. And so one of the things that I do find is crucial is once we explain how the media works, once I give them what to wear, what not to wear, what kind of chair to sit in, how you can frame yourself up for virtual interviews and all that stuff, giving them those foundation tools, the building blocks of being on camera, and then dissecting what they have done on camera with them in person. This is not about a shaming situation. This is not to embarrass you. Instead, it's to notice the things that you're doing well and make sure that we're increasing those, but also find out what you can improve. And let's give you tips to do that. For example, I always tell executives that are really nervous, never ever sit in a chair that spins. Why? Exactly. Why? Because you're exempted because you're such a pro. But why? Because when people get nervous, they swivel.
Do this.
And in fact, I've done interviews with people where they have wheeled 3 feet beyond where they were at the start of the interview. So
right.
Help yourself get in the right mindset. Don't have a chair that swivels. Make sure that you're wearing the right things. Make sure you know where to look, how to talk. What are the ground rules? Can I stop? Can I start? Can I ask them to redo that section? Can I start over the sentence? Things like that. And I find that when you explain how something works, they gain that measure of confidence that will help them on camera.
That's 1,000% too, is that once we get people, and sometimes for my side of it, because I'm not doing things as professional as you, but after, I think getting people on camera and going through training is absolutely necessary, because it's just that process. You're going to start out bad. I always have somebody, when we're talking about doing podcasting and I'm starting a new show, I'm like, if you watch all of my shows backwards, I become an increasingly shitty host, right? Is because I've learned to do this, not very well, but I've still learned and better than I was. So it's that training and just getting used to yourself on camera, your speech patterns, what you're doing to make sure you don't two knuckle up your nose, whatever it is that the people are doing, you just gotta get them through those processes to understand it. Now, let's go ahead and move on. You've got a big event coming up, because I want to make sure we get to talk about this big event that you have coming up, to where tell us a little bit about the event and where it's going to be and all those good things.
Sure. So I'm really excited about this. It's called Media Mastery Experts Live. So MediaMasteryExperts.com. It's an in-person media training camp. This is everything you need to know to supercharge your media training, your media ability, and to get quoted in the news media. So we're doing a ton of workshops. I'm doing Media 101, how to craft your message, how to craft a pitch to get a journalist's attention. We've got guest speakers. One is a personal branding and marketing expert. We've got the head of a speakers bureau coming, about how you work with a speakers bureau, how you can get booked and paid to speak. We've got a former main anchor in Los Angeles news coming, who's going to teach on camera body language, voice, intonation, where to look, how to read a teleprompter, all of that. And then we take everything you're learning and we put it into practice. I booked a TV studio across from the White House. You'll be on camera, on set with me, doing a mock on-camera interview. Then you're going to go do a podcast. Then you're going to go speak on a stage. We're going to record all that with video. You get all that video so that you can use that for all of your platforms. We have a VIP tier. We're going to edit social media clips for you. We're going to edit a 2-minute demo reel for you. So when a journalist says, hey, have you ever been on camera? You can send this demo reel as proof that you can do an on-camera interview. And the VIPs will get one-on-one coaching with me of that mock interview. We're going to play it on that optional final day of the training camp. And that's really the gold, right? That's the invaluable part where you can see how you can improve in the future. So it's coming up September 12th to the 14th in Washington, D.C. No worries for your listeners, viewers, and readers who are hearing about this a year from now, because we're going to keep doing them. So you can just go to our event page and we'd be very happy to have you register.
Absolutely. Can I ask you to do one thing for us, because we do like the social medias, we like the short clips, the whatever. From an expert, from a pro, somebody spent 25 years on camera, can you just give us 3 giveaway quick tips of how to look good on a podcast?
Okay, well, so I don't know if I'm an expert, because look at we're the platform we're using is sort of cutting off half my head. So obviously I failed on this one today, but I'm in a situation where I don't have a real background available, so I apologize. But do you see what I'm wearing? I'm wearing a solid color, right? It's not flashy, because we teach on camera that you don't want to distract from your message. So if I'm wearing polka dots and yellow highlights in my hair and all that stuff, it might distract from what I'm saying. Now, I'm not telling your listeners and viewers and readers to suppress their personality or not be their authentic selves. They absolutely should be. But when we're talking about business messaging for executives and leaders, we want to make sure that there is nothing about their visual appearance on a podcast, on television, on the Today Show, that it's going to distract from that message. So tip number 1, make sure what you're wearing is not distracting from your message. Tip number 2, I would say we've covered, don't sit in a chair that swivels. If you find yourself getting nervous, that could certainly hurt you. And I would say number 3, before you go on a podcast, you have to realize, what is it that you're going to say? What is your main message? And how can you communicate that? I always hear people say a 2-minute elevator pitch. And I'm like, 2 minutes? What skyscraper has ever taken 2 minutes on an elevator? You get like 15 or 20 seconds. You're going from floor 1 to floor 6, right?
Right.
So I always look at it as, So I was looking at it as maybe a 15 or 20 second elevator pitch. How can you succinctly summarize what you're doing. And I see people going on podcasts and on TV, and they haven't been talking to themselves in the mirror, right? Or they haven't worked with somebody on that 15 or 20-second elevator pitch. So when you're going on a podcast, research the host, research the show, find out how you can craft a 15 or 20-second message that you can convey in that podcast or on TV or on radio or on digital, all these new platforms that we have and the platforms that are still to come.
Mark, thank you so much for your expertise, for opening up about your career and all the things that you have accomplished and all the things that you're going to accomplish. I'm very excited to be connected with you and watch this grow as you transition. This has been Mark Albert from Media Advisory Experts. You can find them at mediaadvisoryexperts.com with the Media Mastery Experts Live, September 12th through the 14th, in person in Washington, D.C. Go to mediaadvisoryexperts.com for more information about that. Mark, any parting words for our audience?
Ryan, I would just say for the audience, if you value democracy, if you value the freedoms that we cherish in the United States, please support your local news outlets, whether it's newspaper, radio, TV, digital journalism. Support journalism. I know we don't want to pay for things, but that's the only way that we can have an independent and free press. If you value democracy, support your local media.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Mark. This is Business Uncensored, produced by Titan Media Works. Titan Media Works, we do all things podcasting from front to back. All the things, we put it in your hands to where you just have to come do the fun parts, which is a little bit of research, a little bit of hosting. We do everything else for you. So if you're interested in that, go to titanmediaworks.com and check that out. Or Ryan at Titan Media Works, spelled with an X. I don't know why. That's just the company when I got it. So we'll see you next time here on Business Uncensored.